I deserve more than you can give me, Caleb, Grace said, laughing, holding a glass of champagne next to her boss at a company party. I replied coldly, Great, because I just spoke to your boss, and he's not as smart as he thinks he is. Her face paled when she realized her secret had been revealed. Grace Harper, 34, maneuvered through her morning with the precision of a seasoned conductor. In their modest Chicago home, she packed lunches for her 2 kids, Lily and Max, while fielding a flurry of emails on her phone. Her husband, Caleb, 36, a paramedic, was already out on an early shift, his coffee mug still warm on the counter. Their 12-year marriage was a quiet rhythm of shared responsibilities. Grace, a rising star at a marketing firm, and Caleb, the steady anchor who kept their family grounded. To their friends, they were the couple who had it all: love, trust, and a knack for making it work. At Apex Marketing, Grace's latest campaign had just clinched a $1 million client, earning her a rare shout-out from the CEO, Linda Voss, during the morning briefing. Colleagues clapped, but Grace felt the weight of Ethan Caldwell's gaze from across the room. Ethan, the firm's executive director, was a man who commanded attention with a polished smile and sharp wit. At 42, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who always got what he wanted. His praise came easily. Grace, you're redefining brilliance around here. But his eyes lingered too long, his tone too familiar. She brushed it off, focusing on her presentation notes, but a flicker of unease settled in her chest. That evening, Apex was hosting a gala downtown to celebrate the new contract. Caleb had planned to join her, but a last-minute emergency call from the hospital changed that. Go, have fun, he said over the phone, his voice tired but warm. You earned this. Grace hesitated, her thumb hovering over the call-in button. You sure? She asked. I'll be fine, he insisted. Show him who's boss. She smiled, promised to be home early, and hung up, unaware of the night that awaited her. The gala buzzed with energy, clinking glasses, laughter, and the hum of ambition. Grace arrived alone, her presence drawing nods and smiles from colleagues. She sipped a glass of champagne, then another, letting the bubbles loosen the knot of her day. Ethan found her near the bar, his suit crisp, his charm dialed up. No Caleb tonight, he asked, leaning closer than necessary. Work? She replied, keeping her tone light. His loss, Ethan said, his smile sharp. Let me get you another drink. As the night wore on, Ethan stayed close, his compliments growing bolder. You're not just talented, Grace. You're magnetic. This firm's lucky to have you. She laughed, deflecting, but the alcohol softened her edges. When he suggested showing her the newly renovated executive suite upstairs, you'll love the view. It's where the big decisions happen. She hesitated. A promotion had been dangling in recent talks, and curiosity nudged her forward. Just a quick look, she said, more to herself than to him. The elevator ride was quiet, the air thick with something unspoken. In the suite, the city skyline sparkled through floor-to-ceiling windows, but Grace barely noticed. Ethan's demeanor shifted, his voice lower, his words personal. You're wasted on routine campaigns, Grace. You could run this place someday. She smiled, uneasy, and stepped toward the window to comment on the view. He was already behind her, too close. Before she could react, he kissed her, his hand firm on her waist. For a fleeting moment, caught in a haze of flattery and champagne, she froze. Then, instinct kicked in. She pushed him away, heart pounding. This was a mistake, she said, voice shaking. Ethan's smile didn't falter. Relax, Grace. No one has to know. She fled the room, her pulse racing as she descended the stairs, the gala's noise fading into a dull roar. In the cab home, she pressed her forehead against the cool window, guilt clawing at her. The kids were asleep when she arrived. Caleb was still at work. She stood in the bathroom, staring at her reflection, willing the night to vanish. But the next morning, her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. Attached were grainy photos, her and him in the suite, captured by a hidden camera. His text was blunt. Be my partner in more than just work, or Caleb gets these. Your call. Grace's hands trembled as she deleted the message, but the images burned into her mind. At breakfast, she smiled for Lily and Max, packing their bags with mechanical precision. Caleb kissed her cheek before heading out, oblivious to the storm inside her. At work, Ethan acted as if nothing had happened, but his glances carried a smug weight. Grace buried herself in her projects, but every email, every meeting, felt like a countdown to his next move. By afternoon, another message arrived. Meet me at the cafe on Wells at 7 p.m. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. She sat at her desk, staring at the screen, her stomach twisting. Ignoring him wasn't an option. Those photos could unravel her life. But compliance meant surrendering to his game. Her coworker Mia, noticing her pale face, leaned over. "You okay, Grace?" Grace shook her head, unable to speak. The weight of Ethan's threat pressed harder, but something else stirred, a spark of defiance. She didn't know how, but she wouldn't let him win. Not like this. Grace's phone buzzed again as she sat at her desk, the screen lighting up with Ethan's message. 7 p.m., Wells Cafe. "Don't keep me waiting." Her fingers tightened around the device, the weight of his threat sinking deeper. The photos he'd sent, grainy stills from that night in his office, loomed like a guillotine over her life. She could still feel the ghost of his hand on her waist, the smug edge in his voice when she'd pushed him away. Now, he was tightening the noose, demanding a partnership that made her skin crawl. Ignoring him wasn't an option. Those images could reach Caleb, her colleagues, or worse, her kid's school. But giving in felt like betraying herself all over again. She forced herself through the workday, her usual sharpness dulled by dread. Every time Ethan passed her desk, his glance carried a silent warning. By 6:30 p.m., Grace was in her car, gripping the steering wheel, debating whether to meet him. Her coworker Mia's earlier question, "You okay, Grace?" echoed in her mind. She hadn't answered then, but the concern in Mia's voice lingered, a small lifeline in the chaos. Grace took a deep breath and drove to the cafe, her resolve wavering but intact. She wouldn't let Ethan dictate her life. The cafe was crowded, the hum of conversation a stark contrast to the storm inside her. Ethan sat at a corner table, a black folder in front of him, his posture relaxed but predatory. He stood as she approached, his smile calculated. "Good choice," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Grace sat, her jaw tight, refusing to mirror his ease. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Ethan slid the folder toward her. Inside were printed photos, her in the office, his arm around her, the moment frozen in damning clarity. "These are just copies," he said. "The originals are safe. For now." He leaned forward, his tone almost casual. "You're getting that promotion, Grace. But you'll work closely with me. Very closely. Or these go to Caleb, your team, maybe even your parents." Her stomach churned, but she held his gaze. "This is blackmail," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan shrugged. "Call it leverage. You wanted this as much as I did that night. Now you live with it." His words stung, twisting her guilt into something uglier. She stood, clutching the folder, and left without another word, his laughter trailing behind her. Back in her car, Grace's hands shook as she stuffed the folder under the passenger seat. She drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring through unshed tears. The urge to tell Caleb everything gnawed at her, but the thought of his face, his trust shattered, stopped her cold. She pulled over, her breathing uneven, and replayed Ethan's words. He thought he owned her, that her mistake gave him power. But something shifted inside her, a spark of anger overtaking fear. She wouldn't be his pawn. The next morning, Grace arrived at work early, the folder hidden in her bag. Ethan was already there, his door ajar. He called her in, his tone sharp. "You left quickly last night. Hope you're not having second thoughts." Before she could respond, he stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm. "Don't make this messy, Grace." She jerked away, her voice firm. "Touch me again, and you'll regret it." His eyes narrowed, but he backed off, smirking. "You're playing a dangerous game." At her desk, Grace's pulse raced. She opened her phone, her thumb hovering over the voice recorder app. An idea took root. She needed evidence, something to turn the tables. During lunch, she confided in Mia, her voice breaking as she recounted the gala, the kiss, and Ethan's threats. Mia's face hardened. "That's not just wrong, Grace. It's illegal. You've got those photos in his note. Record him next time he tries something. Then go to the police." Grace hesitated, the shame of exposing her mistake overwhelming. But Mia's words stuck. "He's counting on your fear. Don't give him that power." That afternoon, Ethan summoned her to his office again. Grace slipped her phone into her pocket, the recorder running. He leaned against his desk, his tone mocking. "Ready to play nice? Or do I send those photos to Caleb tonight?" She kept her voice steady. "You think you can control me with this?" He laughed, stepping closer. "I know I can. You've got too much to lose." His threats poured out, each word more brazen, unaware of the device capturing every syllable. Grace's heart pounded, but she held her ground, asking pointed questions to draw out his intent. When he dismissed her, she left, the recording safe in her pocket. At home, Caleb was quieter than usual, his eyes searching hers. "Rough day?" he asked, setting the table for dinner. She nodded, forcing a smile, the weight of her secret unbearable. After the kids were in bed, she sat alone, replaying the recording. Ethan's voice was clear, his threats undeniable. She transferred the file to a USB drive, her hands steadier now. The next step was clear but terrifying. She had to take this to Linda, the CEO, and maybe the police. But first, she needed to face Caleb. The truth was a risk she couldn't avoid any longer. As she lay awake that night, the folder under the car seat and the USB drive in her bag felt like her only weapons. Ethan thought he'd cornered her, but he'd underestimated her resolve. Tomorrow, she'd act, not as a victim, but as someone reclaiming her life. Grace woke with a knot in her stomach, the USB drive with Ethan's recorded threats tucked in her bag alongside the folder of damning photos. Her resolve had hardened overnight. She was done being a pawn in Ethan's game. At breakfast, she moved through the motions, packing lunches for Lily and Max while Caleb sipped his coffee, his usual warmth replaced by a distant nod. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone probing. Grace forced a smile, her voice tight. "Just work stress. I'll handle it." He didn't press, but his gaze lingered, sensing the fracture she couldn't yet confess. At Apex Marketing, Grace avoided Ethan's office, her focus on the plan forming in her mind. The recording, the photos, the note, they were her leverage now. She just needed the courage to use them. Mid-morning, Ethan emailed her, "My office. 11 a.m. Don't test me." Her pulse quickened, but she saw an opportunity. She checked her phone's recorder, ensuring it was ready, and slipped it into her pocket. This time, she'd be prepared. In Ethan's office, he leaned back in his chair, exuding control. "You've been distant, Grace," he said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. "Those photos won't delete themselves. You know what I want." She stood firm, her phone capturing every word. "And if I say no?" she asked, baiting him. His smile twisted. "Then Caleb gets a nice email tonight. Your kid's school might get a copy too. You're not walking away from this." His arrogance fueled her anger, but she kept her tone even, drawing out more threats before excusing herself with a curt nod. The recording was gold, clear, incriminating, and undeniable. Back at her desk, Grace transferred the new audio to the USB drive, her hands steady despite the adrenaline. She couldn't wait any longer. She booked a meeting with Linda Voss, the CEO, for that afternoon. Mia, her co-worker, caught her in the break room, noticing her tense expression. "You're doing it, aren't you?" Mia asked, her voice low. Grace nodded, clutching her bag. "I have to. He's not stopping." Mia squeezed her arm. "You've got this. He's the one who should be scared now." At 2 p.m., Grace entered Linda's office, the USB drive and folder in hand. Linda, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, listened as Grace laid out everything. The gala, the kiss she regretted, Ethan's blackmail, the photos, and the recordings. She played the audio, Ethan's voice filling the room with his threats. Linda's jaw tightened with each word. When the recording ended, she leaned forward. "This is serious, Grace. I'm suspending Ethan immediately pending an investigation. Can I keep these?" Grace handed over the USB and folder, relief mixing with dread. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking. Linda's eyes softened. "You did the right thing. I'll handle it from here." Leaving Linda's office, Grace felt lighter but not free. The truth about her mistake still hung over her, and Caleb deserved to know before Ethan's retaliation could reach him. She drove to the hospital where Caleb worked, her heart pounding as she texted him. "Need to talk. Urgent. Can we meet at the diner across from you?" He replied quickly, "On break in 20. I'll be there." At the diner, Grace sat in a corner booth, the folder hidden in her bag. Caleb arrived, his paramedic uniform wrinkled from a long shift, his expression wary. "What's going on, Grace?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling, and told him everything. The gala, her moment of weakness, Ethan's blackmail, the recordings, and her meeting with Linda. She didn't soften the truth or make excuses, her voice steady despite the tears welling up. "I'm so sorry, Caleb. I messed up, but I'm trying to fix it." Caleb's face was unreadable, his hands clenched on the table. He stayed silent for a long moment, then asked, his voice low, "If he hadn't blackmailed you, would you have told me?" The question cut deeper than she expected. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her silence was answer enough. Caleb's eyes darkened, and he stood. "I need time," he said, his voice breaking. He walked out, leaving Grace alone with her untouched coffee and a sinking heart. That evening, as Grace picked up the kids from school, her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. It was a single photo, her and Ethan in the office, sent anonymously. Her blood ran cold. Ethan was striking back, and he'd gotten to Caleb first. She called Caleb, but he didn't answer. Panic set in as she realized the photos might not stop at him. She drove home, checking her rearview mirror as if Ethan's shadow followed her. At home, she hid the folder in a locked drawer and replayed the day's events. Linda's promise of action was a start, but Ethan's reach was longer than she'd feared. She texted Mia, asking her to keep an eye out at work. Mia replied, "Heard Ethan's been pulled from meetings. People are whispering. Stay strong." Grace sat on the couch, the kids' laughter from their room a painful contrast to her turmoil. She needed to act fast, before Ethan's next move destroyed what was left of her life. Grace's phone felt like a live wire in her hand, the anonymous photo from Ethan, a damning snapshot of their moment in his office, burning in her mind. Caleb hadn't answered her calls since their diner confrontation, and the silence was louder than any argument. She'd confessed everything: the gala, her reckless mistake, Ethan's blackmail, and her evidence against him. But Caleb's question, "Would you have told me if he hadn't blackmailed you?" hung unanswered, a wound she couldn't close. Now, with Ethan escalating his threats, Grace knew she had to act before he unraveled her life further. The next morning, she dropped Lily and Max at school, her smile forced as they chattered about their day. Back home, she retrieved the folder of photos and the USB drive with Ethan's recorded threats from her locked drawer. Her meeting with Linda Voss, Apex Marketing CEO, had set things in motion, but Ethan's anonymous message proved he wasn't backing down. Grace drove to the nearest police station, her hands steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Inside, she met Officer Karen Tate, who listened as Grace laid out the story: the gala, the kiss, the photos, Ethan's demands, and the recordings. She handed over the USB and the folder, including the note Ethan had left on her desk. Tate's expression hardened as she reviewed the evidence. "This is coercion and harassment, Miss Harper. You're protected under Illinois law. We'll take it from here." As Grace left the station, her phone buzzed with a text from Mia: "Ethan's out. Cops showed up at Apex this morning. He's at the station now." Relief surged, but it was fleeting. Ethan's arrest didn't erase the damage to her marriage or the fear of more photos surfacing. She needed to face Caleb again, but first, she returned to Apex. Linda called her into a private meeting. "Ethan's been fired," Linda said, her tone firm. "Your evidence was airtight. The board's behind you, and we're cooperating with the police." She paused, her voice softening. "I'm sorry you went through this, Grace. Take whatever time you need." Grace nodded, grateful but hollow. The victory over Ethan felt overshadowed by the fracture at home. She texted Caleb again. "Can we talk? I'm at the diner by the hospital. Please." He didn't respond, but she drove there anyway, hoping he'd show. At the diner, she sat alone, the folder now safely stored in her car. After an hour, Caleb appeared, his face drawn from a double shift. He slid into the booth, his eyes avoiding hers. "What more is there to say, Grace?" he asked, his voice flat. She took a shaky breath. "I know I broke your trust. I'll carry that forever. But I'm fighting to make this right. Ethan's been arrested, blackmail, harassment, all of it. I gave the police everything. I'm not hiding anymore." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he listened as she explained the recordings, the photos, and the police report. When she finished, he leaned back, his voice low. "You should have told me that night. Not because of him, but because of us." He stood, his words heavy. "I want a divorce. I can't unsee this." The word divorce hit like a punch, but Grace didn't beg. She'd expected it, dreaded it, but his pain was as real as hers. "I understand," she whispered. He left without another word, the diner's door swinging shut behind him. Grace drove home, her vision blurred by tears. The kids were at her mother's for the night. She needed space to face this storm. Alone, she sat on the couch, replaying every choice that led her here. Ethan's arrest was justice, but it couldn't mend what she'd broken. The next day, Mia called with an update. "Ethan's out on bail, but the case is solid. The police have his hard drive, more evidence than just your stuff. He's done, Grace." The news should have lifted her, but it didn't. Caleb's absence was a void nothing could fill. She threw herself into work, delivering campaigns with her usual precision, but every smile felt borrowed. At home, she kept up routines for the kids, shielding them from the chaos. Lily asked why Daddy wasn't home. Grace deflected, promising they'd see him soon. A week later, An email from an unknown address arrived. Another photo, this time sent to her work account. Grace's heart sank, but she forwarded it to Officer Tate immediately. Tate called within the hour. We traced the email to Ethan. He's violated bail conditions. We're bringing him in again. Grace exhaled, a small weight lifting. But when she tried calling Caleb to update him, his phone went to voicemail. She left a message, her voice steady. Ethan's facing more charges. I'm trying to fix this, Caleb. For the kids, for us. I hope you'll talk to me. That night, Grace sat with her laptop, researching new jobs. Apex was supportive, but the memories of Ethan's office lingered like a stain. She needed a fresh start. As she scrolled, her phone lit up with a text from Caleb. I'll be at the house tomorrow. We need to talk about the kids. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a step. Grace closed her laptop, her resolve sharpening. Ethan had tried to break her, but she was still standing. Now, she had to face the consequences of her choices, not just for herself, but for the family she still hoped to save. Grace stood in the kitchen, stirring pasta for Lily and Max, the normalcy of the task a thin shield against the storm of the past weeks. Ethan's arrest for blackmail and harassment had shaken Apex marketing, but it was Caleb's absence that carved the deepest wound. His request for a divorce echoed in her mind, a consequence of her betrayal at the gala and the silence that followed. The kids, oblivious to the fracture, laughed in the living room, their voices a reminder of what she was fighting to preserve. Tonight, Caleb was coming to discuss their future, and Grace braced for a conversation that could redefine their family. Her phone buzzed with a message from Officer Tate. Ethan's bail was revoked after the second email. He's in custody, trial set for next month. Grace exhaled, the news a small victory. Ethan's hard drive, seized by the police, revealed not just her photos but evidence of similar coercion against two other former employees. The case was airtight, with charges of harassment and extortion stacking against him. At Apex, Linda Voss had ensured his termination was permanent, and the company offered Grace a transfer to a new branch, a chance to escape the shadow of his office. She hadn't decided yet, but the offer felt like a lifeline. Caleb arrived at 7 p.m., his paramedic bag slung over his shoulder, his expression guarded. The kids ran to him, their hugs a fleeting moment of warmth before Grace sent them to their rooms. She and Caleb sat at the dining table, the space between them heavy with unspoken pain. We need to figure out what's next, he said, his voice steady but distant. For Lily and Max. Grace nodded, her hands clasped tightly. I want what's best for them. And I'm sorry, Caleb. I'll keep saying it because I mean it. He looked at her, his eyes searching. I believe you're sorry. But trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. I can't live wondering what else you might hide. Grace swallowed hard, the truth of his words cutting deep. I'm not asking you to stay, she said. But I want us to be partners for the kids. They deserve that. Caleb leaned back, considering. We'll split custody, 50-50. I found an apartment near their school. We'll make it work. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a path forward. Grace agreed, her heart aching but resolute. Over the next month, the legal gears turned. Ethan's trial ended in a conviction, 3 years for coercion and harassment, his career and reputation in ruins. Grace followed the proceedings from a distance, relieved but not triumphant. The victory couldn't undo her mistake or the photos that had reached Caleb's phone. She started therapy, working through the guilt that still woke her at night. At Apex, she accepted the transfer to a new branch in Evanston, a fresh start where her talent, not her past, defined her. Colleagues there welcomed her, unaware of the scandal, and her campaigns began earning praise again. Caleb and Grace settled into a rhythm of co-parenting. He picked up the kids on weekends, his new apartment filled with their drawings and toys. Their interactions were polite, sometimes warm, but the intimacy of their 12-year marriage was gone. One evening, dropping off the kids, Caleb lingered at the door. You did the right thing with Ethan, he said, his voice softer. I'm proud of you for that. Grace met his gaze, a flicker of hope sparking. Thanks, she replied. I'm trying to be someone they can be proud of too. He nodded and left, the moment fleeting but significant. 6 months later, Grace was invited to speak at a women's empowerment event in Chicago, organized by a local nonprofit. She hesitated but accepted, driven by a need to turn her pain into purpose. Standing before a small crowd, she shared her story, the gala, the blackmail, her fight to reclaim her life. I made a mistake, she said, her voice steady. But I learned that courage isn't about being perfect. It's about facing the consequences and choosing to stand up, even when you're scared. The audience applauded, and a young woman approached afterward, sharing her own story of workplace harassment. Grace listened, offering advice, feeling a strength she hadn't known she had. At home, Grace tucked Lily and Max into bed, their questions about Daddy's new place answered with care. She'd found a new apartment too, closer to her Evanston office, and the kids were adjusting. Caleb called to confirm their weekend plans, his tone professional but kind. "They're excited to see you," Grace said. "Good," he replied. "We'll figure this out, Grace." It wasn't love, but it was respect, a foundation they could build on for their children. As she turned off the kitchen light, Grace glanced at a photo of the four of them from happier times. The love she'd lost with Caleb would always sting, but she'd gained something else: resilience. Ethan had tried to break her, but she'd dismantled his power instead. Her mistake didn't define her, her response did. She wasn't just a mother or an employee now. She was a woman who'd faced her worst moment and come out stronger. For Lily, for Max, for herself, that was enough.